Strange but true stories. Tales from the light side, the dark side, and the other side. I'm Steve White. If you have been a fan of this channel for a while, you know there are lots of unexplained creatures that lurk in dark forests and sparsely populated areas. One such creature that has been relegated to lore and legend is the Wendigo. We featured a young man's story about an encounter he had with what he called the Wendigo that happened in April 2016 on a plot of hunting land in southwest Wisconsin, about 15 miles outside of Richland Center. In the previous story, we were told about a group of hunters that went to a hunting cabin on this plot of land and came face to face with the creature, and were even chased by it as they drove away. In this group was the guy who sent us the story, his father, his father's two friends named James and George, and George's son Elliot. But that wasn't the end to his story. He returned to the hunting cabin and had yet another encounter with the Wendigo. This is his follow-up. To understand this story better, you may want to go back and watch the earlier video about the Wendigo that posted to YouTube on our channel on July 3rd, 2017. I learned a lot about past and new encounters with the Wendigo in the last few weeks. After opening weekend for deer hunting, I had a long conversation with James while we were cleaning a deer he had downed. We shot the breeze for a little while about how he got the deer, but after a pause in the conversation, I went straight for my questions. "What do you think that thing was?" I asked him. He finished removing a backstrap from the deer before answering me. "You know, you probably scoured the internet for hours, just like I did after last year. I didn't know what it was for the longest time until I had the bright idea to search for things on the internet." "That wasn't the first time you saw it then? How long have you known about it?" I prodded him. "Since before you were even born. My brother and I first encountered it back when we were your age. We saw it skulking around late one night during a bonfire. We couldn't even move, we were so scared. Then we went almost a decade without even so much as a glimpse of the thing. I saw it while tracking a deer in the early 90s. It was ahead of me following the blood trail. I stopped and let it get out of my sight line before I quickly left the woods." "What about your brother?" I asked. James's brother was a hard topic to get him to open up about. He had taken his own life when I was very young. He had issues with depression and had apparently become extremely paranoid, leading up to him committing suicide. He saw it way more times than I did. Almost yearly, he would have an encounter with it. He told me once of how he had fallen asleep in his tree stand and woken up with it halfway up the ladder. I think it drove him insane. I think it's why he killed himself. After that, I didn't question him any further. We finished cutting up the deer and waited for the others to return from the woods. I wanted to keep asking him questions, to find out what else he knew about the Wendigo. But I knew better than to press my luck. The amount of information I had gotten out of him was more than I had ever expected. As for the new encounters, Elliot and I both have had one. Elliot's was brief, and I don't believe he knew what he saw at the time. He said that he saw something when he went out to pee in the middle of the night during bow hunting season, similar to my first sighting of it. He opened the door and saw something fly out of the briars and off into the field. He said he thought he had spooked a coyote, but that it wasn't shaped right to be a coyote. He described a white figure streaking across the cornfield before he lost sight of it. Mine, however, was a very close encounter. Before we left for home after the first weekend, we had cleanup duty and some projects to take care of before we left. We repaired a section of the fence that had been damaged during a windstorm, chopped up some logs for firewood, and cleared some brush by our deer hanging station. Right as we were preparing to leave, my dad told me that he had left the seat pad in his tree stand, and that I would have to go and get it. I took one of the ATVs down to the tree line and headed into the forest. I had taken off all of my blaze orange clothing and was left wearing my dark pair of jeans, a cryptic Typhon sweatshirt, and a hat with the matching pattern. Typhon is a nighttime predator hunting camouflage pattern, and I credit it, along with my kukri knife, with saving my life. I reached the barbed wire fence that kept the farmer's cows out of the forest and began to crawl underneath it. I was doing my best to keep quiet in order to not disturb any deer that had bedded down in the area. But suddenly, something flushed out from the darkness and sped away down the deer trail. "Damn," I whispered to myself as I scanned the forest for the deer I had spooked. I looked for the downed tree that crossed the deer trail that I could follow to the tree stand and almost dropped dead when my eyes found it. Crouching behind the fallen tree was the Wendigo. Its right hand was gripping the tree and its left rested on its leg. A stench that almost forced up my dinner hit my nose. And at that moment, I knew that I wasn't what spooked the deer. I had never encountered the smell before now, not even when I was damn near face to face with it. It wasn't nearly as close as the time at the fence, but now I could get much more detail out of its body. The arms were crazy long, and they ended in massive clawed hands. Each vertebra was visible down its back, and all the other joints looked painfully large compared to its thin limbs. I could also see the bottom of its face now, at least the left side. Its mouth was larger than it should have been, and it didn't have lips. They appeared to have been chewed off, revealing sharp, yellow, and mangled teeth. I slid on my back slowly out from under the wire, but my jeans snagged a barb and rattled the rusty fence. The Wendigo's head snapped to me. I thought I was dead right then and there. But it just stared, like it sat outside the cabin the first time I saw it. After a minute, it snapped its head back to the trail and stood deathly still again. I forced myself to get up and move this time, creeping towards a large tree in front of me. I was lucky it had rained all of the night before and wetted the leaves. I watched my steps carefully as to not disturb the leaves or snap a twig and give myself away. I made it to the tree without being noticed, and I knelt down to help conceal myself better. My heart was beating so heavily, I was surprised that the Wendigo didn't hear it as I sat there. The whole time I sat there, my right hand had a hold of my kukri, ready to draw it if need be. Only my head poked out from behind the tree as I watched it. It was still for about another minute before moving blindingly fast and horrifyingly quiet to the other side of the tree. I could have snapped my fingers in the same amount of time it took to cross over. It then began to move in those jerky bursts through the forest in the direction the deer ran off, which also happened to be towards the stand. I could have bolted for the ATV and made it back safe, and said I couldn't find the stand in the darkness, but then my dad would have gone out. I couldn't let him come out here with that thing on the prowl for dinner. So my dumbass ghosted my way to the stand, taking extra special care to watch my footing. I tried my best to keep the Wendigo in sight, but wound up losing it about 75 yards from the stand. I came to the ladder and placed my foot on the bottom rung, letting out a metallic screech that might as well have been a nuclear explosion. I winced and gripped the ladder, waiting for a few seconds before continuing up. The seat pad was velcroed down. It couldn't have been anything quieter. The straps were small, though, and they came off with a small ripping sound that couldn't have been heard at the bottom of the ladder. At least, so I thought. I tucked the pad under my arm and descended slowly. When I reached the bottom, I turned around, and again, I froze. It was close enough for me to touch it. It was stretched out on all fours, its face not 3 feet from mine, with a hellish grin. its stench engulfing me like an invisible smoke. In that moment, I knew I was going to die right here in these woods. My kukri was on my belt in the back of my pants, close enough for me to grab it if I moved carefully enough. The stare down went on for at least 15 seconds before my hand was on the knife. The creature growled as soon as I touched my knife. That scared me so badly I pulled the knife and blindly swung it at its head before running for my life. I couldn't tell right away if I hit it, however. I could tell that Usain Bolt didn't have a damn thing on me that night. When I hit the fence, I hurdled it instead of crawling under it. I couldn't believe I didn't drop my knife or the pad before reaching the ATV. But they were both in hand as I got on and spit dirt as I drove away. When I got to the cabin, everyone was inside watching football while they waited for me. I caught my breath after parking the ATV and then entered. "You look like hell, man. Are you okay?" Elliot asked me. "Yeah, I'm fine," I told him, sitting down on the couch, wiping sweat from my brow and trying to hide my shaking hands. I continually blew off all their questions until we left, and I didn't loosen up until my dad and I made it through Madison on our way home. I took my kukri back off my belt, and just on a chance I unsheathed it and inspected the blade. Along the front edge and point was a dried black crust, like a scab on my knife. Immediately I scraped it off into a Ziploc bag, and I plan on turning it over to a family friend who is a game warden for the DNR. I hope he'll send it in to be tested to see if it matches anything. We returned the Friday after Thanksgiving and hunted from 2 until dark. Then James sat everyone down and had a conversation with us. He spilled everything he had told me. When he was all done, Elliot and George were a little skeptical, but my dad was a complete believer. Then James had me tell the story of my first encounter with it, and then of what had happened that last Sunday. "You were out there alone in the dark with that thing?" my dad asked when I was done. "And you said it spoke to you?" "The legends say they're cursed humans, so I would think speech would be in their repertoire," I responded. "But I only heard it say no, so I'm not 100% sure." We debated the idea of a monster living in the woods for a little while before James pulled out a folded piece of paper. He unfolded it and held it in front of everyone. On it was a trail camera photo from early October during bow season. It showed the Wendigo lurking in the bushes behind 2 does at night. James let everyone have a good long look at it before he opened the door of the wood stove and tossed the image in. "How about that? Are you two gonna believe us now?" George and Elliot were silent. I was pissed that he burned the picture because I wanted to get a copy of it and send it to you. I'm not sure how I like James keeping this only amongst us, although I feel like sharing this with you is pushing the boundary enough, and I don't want to upset him if he finds out. I can't believe after what I've seen that it is some monster from Native American folklore. I have come to my own conclusion that it is more of a living creature like you or me. That it is both curious and dangerous depending on how it is encountered. When I saw it in the brush outside our cabin, it was docile and seemed non-threatening while it looked around. When it stuck up those animal carcasses and mutilated the neighbors' farm animals, I think it wanted to let us all know that we weren't welcome. When I was face to face with it at the fence, I believe it was being defensive, trying to scare us off. As for my encounter with it alone in the woods, I believe then it was looking for food, or rather hunting for food. Now, I understand that this next bit may sound a little off the wall, but I'm only telling you what I have concluded. I think the smell is a way for the Wendigo to track its prey. I never smelled it before I was in those woods, only when it chased the deer and approached me. My theory is that it approaches its prey and sort of skunks them with the smell, allowing for it to follow them. Crazy, I know, but I have no other explanation. I honestly don't know if I will ever return to the land again. After last year, I thought it was an isolated incident. Maybe that it was just passing through. I now know that it isn't, and that it calls those woods home. No deer will ever be worth risking my life in those woods, nor will my dad's friendship with James and George play any factor in me returning. I'm doing my best to convince my dad that he can't go back for his own safety, but he's not convinced yet. He thinks that staying out of the woods while it's dark and not leaving the cabin at night will keep him out of harm's way. I'm worried that my dad will be the reason that I end up going back, just like he was the reason I decided to get the seat pad that night. If I can't convince him to stay away, I'll have to go and be his protector. That's what I keep telling myself anyway. That I can't let him die alone in the dark at the hands of some creature he knows very little about. I'm open to any other advice or knowledge about wendigos that will be able to help me to help everyone else. Thanks for listening. And I hope that a year from now, I can bring you good news. This has been another strange but true story. Have you ever had an encounter with a creature that you can't quite put your mind around? We would love to hear about it. Send us your story to strangebutTrueStories2@gmail.com. Let us know what you thought of this video in the comments below, and subscribe if you haven't already. I'm Steve White. Until next time.